Hi, I'm Brandon Fox, the coordinator of health and fitness and Sandburg College's athletic trainer. We're here today in our fitness studio and we're masked up, appropriate social distancing, and we want to bring you a couple tips and tricks as it relates to some ergonomic health. We were talking before this that the idea is, guys, that we are as active as possible, and so when we get out of our desk or our day jobs or cubicles, what have you, that we're out and about, enjoying life, being active, doing things we love. But specifically today, we're kind of talking about some problems that we see with a lot of people that tend to be sedentary in their work, where they sit in a cubicle all day or a desk. And one of the big ones is overhead activity. So hopefully outside of work, you're out playing, racquetball, tennis, anything that gets you overhead. If you can't, and you're not doing overhead lifting and exercise and swimming, etc., fun stuff outside, or heaven forbid yard work where you get up overhead, we have a couple tips and tricks for you. So I'm going to show you a couple from a seated position that you can do at your workstation. With regards to overhead activity, of course, if you don't get overhead in life, you may lose that mobility. And again, going back to what I just said, ideally you are getting overhead in your recreational activities or even in your job. But some of the things that can be a limiting factor with regards to getting overhead is upper thoracic spine, lack of extension. So if I get here rounded out and me getting overhead, that's kind of problematic. Obviously, I'm over-exaggerating this. Or if I don't have a certain amount of flexibility in my lats. So my lats are kind of extenders of my humerus and my arm. So whether I'm doing lat pulls or bringing it down this way, if I don't have flexibility here, it may limit my ability to get overhead. So I'm going to show you a stretch at your workstation that you could do. So depending on your level of flexibility or lack thereof, you may choose to do palms down, neutral position, forearms on your workstation, or actually your humerus or elbows being supported. You can kind of play with this to see how you feel it best. So what we'll do is I'm going to start for me. My elbows are supported on the table, my forearms are on here. Again, pronated or neutral is up to you. And what I'm going to do, if you can swing around on a side view for me, Bill, is that I am going to roll my chair back, because I have the benefit of having this rolling chair. And as I do that, I am starting to get into an overhead position. It's okay if my forearms come up, because what's supported here is my humerus, and I'm going down into extension. So right now I feel a pretty good stretch, and I can kind of just oscillate into this a little bit by rolling it back. And now you can see that I'm overhead just by rolling my chair back. Now, a secondary thing that I can do to make this stretch better, instead of just rolling back, ideally I don't want a rounded upper thoracic spine. The best case scenario is that I manage to get myself into a extended upper thoracic position. So a trick I'll show you is I would do it while seated, but it's a very similar variation to doing a cat camel when we would go into flexion and extend. I'm going to do that in a seated position now. So I kind of just add that extended position into this stretch that we just did. So as I roll back, I'm already feeling a pretty good stretch, but I'm going to make sure instead of being rounded, I'm going to try to extend my thoracic spine a little bit more, and that just adds that little bit extra to that stretch. So again, excuse me as I adjust my mask, getting into that thoracic extension just adds that little bit extra to the stretch to help you feel it a little bit more. So again, I'm going to start here. I can even extend here first and then go into my stretch, or I can try to extend at the bottom, whatever's comfortable for you, it doesn't matter. So again, I'm going to go ahead and extend here and get into a good thoracic extension position, and then roll myself backwards until I feel a good stretch. And I can just hold this for a few seconds. I can come up to relieve the tension, ease back into it. You don't necessarily need to sit and hold for a solid 20 to 30 seconds like we thought in the old days. You can kind of get into a position and hold it for a few seconds, relieve some of the tension, get back into that position and feel a stretch, ease out of it, and then ease into it again, okay? It doesn't have to be a sit and hold. There's no exact protocol. Anybody that says that is making that data up. So just getting into these positions, I think, is important. Just like recreationally outside of here, just getting into those positions and getting overhead is important. It's not that you need to do X amount of reps overhead, X amount of seconds being held. There's no data to support that. So with that being said, while we're on the subject of being in this seated workstation position. Some of the postures that we tend to adopt while being in this seated position, working at a computer on a side view, tend to be what they call as anterior head carriers. It's forward head, forward shoulders posture. And so you can see in this position, my upper thoracic spine, and actually pretty much my whole spine, is in this flexed position. And to compensate so I'm not looking down like this, my workstation's in front of me, I go into this cervical extension here. So this is kind of our typical work posture that's no bueno. So what we're gonna do to try to mitigate this is going into upper thoracic extension like we just kind of did, as well as fixing this issue here where I don't have this super hinge spot in my neck like this. So that mobility drill is going to where I'm taking my chin and I'm looking to take it backwards into a cervical retracted position. So basically I'm going to push my chin backwards. It's almost as if I'm trying to elongate my spine, like somebody's taking from the crown of my head a string and lifting me up and I'm trying to get tall. So as I do that, my chin will go backwards. So it'll look like this. And again, you don't have to use your hands, but it's a nice demonstration that I'm pushing it backwards. Here's my terrible position. And there we go. You can also use the chair for support to make sure that I have a position to push against. I can even take it back as far as possible. And what's happening there is I'm getting lower cervical spine extension, and I'm getting upper thoracic spine extension as well. And then I'm getting flexion of my upper cervical spine, which basically goes into extension this way. So we're basically just doing the opposite of the bad posture. Lower cervical, upper thoracic extension, and upper cervical flexion. And again, this isn't the perfect fix. Ideally, we are just getting out of this position with regular life activities, whether that be resistance training, sporting and recreational activity, other life activity that just doesn't have you sitting into this position for prolonged periods. However, if you're forced to, please take micro breaks, get up and move. But even while sitting, you can do these little micro breaks to alleviate some of the shortened tissues and bad postural habits that can happen for prolonged sitting. So a last one that I would like to share with you is a lot of people will develop hip stiffness, and that's a very ambiguous term. So more specifically, our lateral hip musculature, our piriformis, can get tight from sitting for prolonged periods. So one of the stretches that I like to do with athletes, or if you have the ability to get down on the floor, is to stretch my piriformis in this lateral hip by crossing it over and using my other leg to lift up. Well, if you don't have the ability to do that, you don't have the office space, a comfortable floor, etc., you can do that while seated as well. So one thing I think that will help is if you have the ability to, while standing, this seems a little weird, but I'll demonstrate it standing as well as seated. If you have the ability to play with your pelvis position, have a little control over this. So instead of just moving my spine, if you have the ability to anteriorly and posteriorly tilt your pelvis, it can add to this stretch. Unless you're so tight that just literally crossing your leg over is going to be that phenomenal stretch, and that's great. Some people, they're flexible enough by just crossing over like this, they might not get the stretch. They might not feel an adequate stretch. So one way to improve upon this is to adopt that anterior tilt of my pelvis, and that will make this stretch that much more efficient. So I'll just hold this for a few seconds. I can even rock and oscillate into it a little bit while maintaining this posture, and I'll come back and relax. Then I'm gonna adopt that anterior tilt again. I can oscillate into it, and then I can relax. And I'll just do that for maybe 3 or 4 rounds. Adopt that anterior tilt, oscillate into it, and then relax. One more time, anterior tilt, oscillate into it, and relax. Now again, you don't have to do this if just crossing your hip over in the first place into this external inflection rotation, if this is already super tight for you, then just let this be your stretch. Over time, if this becomes easier and it's not as much of a stretch anymore, that's when you add to it with potentially this anterior tilt, okay? And you can do that on both sides. There's no recommended, you should do this X amount of times on both legs. That data would just be made up. So just getting into those positions is helpful. What's even more helpful is just getting up and being active, by the way. So that's the caveat there. So thank you guys. I appreciate your time. And remember to stay safe.